So, what kind of watch do we get when Scandinavia meets the Swiss? What's up, guys? It's your boy Rich here with Bravur Scandinavia, a watch with a Swedish sole, a Swiss heart, and a Scandinavian design. That's a lot for a minimalist watch. So let's go see how it turned out. Let's go. And here is the super thin Scandinavia in 39 millimeters, 44.5 millimeters from lug to lug, 10.1 millimeters thin, and with a 20 millimeter lug width. So let's talk about the thinness of this case, as if 10.1 millimeters wasn't thin enough, and that's because it would actually be thinner if it wasn't for the domed sapphire crystal, which makes up 2.3 millimeters in height. So if the crystal wasn't as raised, the case would be under 8 millimeters thin, and that is really impressive. And here we're going to see the sign crown, and in it, it says AV, and there is an interesting story behind that, which we'll talk about in a little later on. So it would seem as if the thinness of the case is the real star of this watch, but I would argue that the dial is just as big of a star. And that's because the dial is a curved dial. So right along the edge, we can see it slope downwards, and so does the minute hand and second hand. And at the very tip of both hands, we can see them angled downward, and they meet perfectly along the edge of the curved dial. The indices are applied. The date window has a nice gold frame and a nice center track right in the middle printed in black. And below 6 o'clock it says Swedish sole, Swiss heart, making it a really attractive dial. This dial is called sparkling white, but I would describe the dial more of a vintage off-white, but it is also available in a midnight blue and jet black. And all dials have different leather strap options. This one is in tan, but it also looks really nice in black. And I think this tan version is more contemporary, while the black is more classic. At least that's the opinion of Magnus, one of the owners of Bravur watches. Earlier, I touched on AV in the crown and the interesting story behind that, because that is also part of their logo. So why AV? Well, AV are two letters in Bravur, and they decided to use AV sort of like this Argyle pattern, this cross hatching, because A and then the V. So I don't know if I'm going to explain that properly, but here it says A, and then the next one would be the letter V upside down, A, upside down V, A upside down V. So you get what I'm trying to say. Creating this like Argyle sweater is the best way I can describe this pattern. And Bravur did a nice job with its finishing, where it starts off polished, brushed, polished, domed sapphire crystal. A really nice and attractive finishing. So we just got done seeing the Caseback, which I describe as an Argyle sweater pattern. So what is powering the Scandinavia? Well, earlier on the dial I showed you where it says Swedish sole, Swiss heart, and that's because the Scandinavia uses the Solida 300 automatic movement. And each watch is hand built in Sweden, and they take about 2 weeks to build your watch. So let's talk about this leather strap. Firstly, it comes with a nice deployment clasp, but also on the back of the strap it says vegetable tan leather. So what does that mean? We've heard that before. Well, it is basically a method of tanning the cowhide into leather, and it's called vegetable because of the natural materials used in the tanning process, which is basically free of chemicals. And I think the quality of the strap is a good one. You can see here that it is nicely padded, and I do think the deployment clasp is a nice touch. And here we can see more of their branding on the clasp. I think this is a nice time for some wrist shots. Mickey will keep you company, and I'll be right back. The price of the Scandinavia is $9.95, and I think for that we are getting a well-made watch, hand-built in Sweden. And because this is a minimalist watch, it would make sense that the presentation is also a minimalist presentation. Here is the outer box, and it comes inside this leather wallet. The watch goes in here, cleaning cloth, warranty information. So this would actually make a nice travel companion. And another fun and practical touch is the catalog of our Scandinavia, because it's always fun to read about our new watch while wearing our new watch, especially over coffee. And we're back with some final thoughts on the Scandinavia. There are a lot of companies with romantic stories behind the watches that resonate with us, or stories behind a brand, or how a certain model was developed, and that appeals to us. And usually the most appealing stories are the long and legendary histories behind the brand. In Bravur's case, because they are a new company, what they are doing is selling us on the idea of how passionate they are about their heritage. And while the industry standard for the steel used is a 316L steel, and while Bravur still uses the 316L steel, they only source the steel from their own country by a supplier called Sandvik. And I know I probably just butchered that name, so I'll leave it somewhere on the screen. And in fact, that same company used to supply Rolex with their steel and possibly still provide them with their 904L steel. But in Bravur's case, they're really passionate and only want to use the steel sourced in their own country. And for that, I find that a sincere passion. It's been great getting to know and work with Magnus, one of the people behind Bravur watches, because he is really sincere and passionate about his craft. And I find that to be really contagious. And during our communications, during our collaboration, Magnus has been very detailed, and I think that showed through in the final product of the Scandinavia. And I also find him to be really sincere, from the use of his materials to being committed to only using steel from Sweden, to that detailed dial with his curved minute hand, second hand, and dial. You know, that is a lot of different elements to combine to make work in a minimalist watch, but he found a way to make it work, and I think the end result is a really terrific looking watch. You know, a dress watch is not the type of watch that's been on my mind, but the Cartier tank has always been on my mind. And to me, I think the best way to wear the tank is dress casually in a jeans and a t-shirt than it does with a suit. And I think that's exactly the same way that I would wear Scandinavia. The Scandinavian is a modern dress watch with a vintage feel. That's what caught my eye. The rest was a bonus. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you the next time. And here is the super thin European. No. And we're back with some final thoughts on the Italian Scandinavian. The Scandinavian. The Scandinavian.